Jake thought the worst part of his day was a canceled class, until he accidentally walked in on his roommate and discovered she wasn't from this world. Jake was having one of those days where everything seemed to go wrong. First, his alarm didn't go off, making him late for his morning astronomy class. Then he spilled coffee all over his favorite shirt right before his presentation on Jupiter's moons. But the final straw came when Professor Williams announced that the evening lab session was canceled due to a power outage in the science building. Great, Jake muttered to himself as he packed up his books. I rushed through dinner for nothing. He lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment just off campus with his roommate Zara, who he'd met through the university's housing board 6 months ago. She was an international student, though she never talked much about where exactly she was from. Jake assumed it was somewhere in Eastern Europe based on her slight accent, but he never pressed for details. They got along well enough, keeping to their own schedules and splitting the bills fairly. The walk home took about 15 minutes, and Jake used the time to think about his upcoming midterm exams. Astronomy had always fascinated him, especially the possibility of life on other worlds. He often wondered what it would be like to discover that humans weren't alone in the universe. Little did he know how soon that question would be answered. When he reached their apartment building, Jake climbed the 3 flights of stairs to their floor. The hallway was quiet, as usual for a Tuesday evening. Most students were probably still in the library or at their night classes. He fumbled with his keys for a moment before unlocking the door to apartment 3B. The apartment was dimly lit, with only the soft glow from the kitchen light illuminating the living room. Jake assumed Zara was already asleep or still at her job at the campus research facility. She worked odd hours, often leaving early in the morning and coming back late at night. Sometimes Jake wondered what kind of research kept her so busy, but again he respected her privacy. He kicked off his shoes and tossed his backpack onto the couch. That's when he remembered his astronomy textbook. He'd left it on the bathroom counter that morning while getting ready, planning to grab it before his evening class. Since the class was canceled, he still needed it to study for tomorrow's quiz on planetary atmospheres. Jake walked down the short hallway toward the bathroom, his socks making soft shuffling sounds on the wooden floor. The bathroom door was slightly open, and he could see the light was on inside. Without thinking much about it, he pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. What he saw made him freeze completely. Zara stood in front of the mirror, but she looked nothing like the person he'd been living with for the past 6 months. Her skin had a soft silvery glow, almost like moonlight on water. Along her arms and shoulders were intricate patterns that looked like delicate tattoos, except they seemed to shimmer and move slightly in the light. But what really caught his attention were the thin, almost transparent wing-like structures extending from her shoulder blades. They weren't large or dramatic, more like delicate fins that moved gently as she breathed. She was holding what looked like a makeup brush, carefully applying some kind of cream to cover the glowing patterns on her arms. On the counter were several small containers filled with various skin-toned liquids and powders. For a moment, Jake's brain simply couldn't process what he was seeing. It was like looking at a special effect from a movie, except this was real and happening right in front of him. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Zara noticed him in the mirror and turned around calmly. She didn't scream or try to cover herself like Jake expected. Instead, she gave him a small smile and said something that shocked him even more than her appearance. "Oh, perfect timing," she said in her familiar voice, though now Jake could hear something different in her accent. "I was actually hoping you'd come home early tonight. I've been meaning to tell you about this, but the right moment never seemed to come up." Jake blinked several times, wondering if he was dreaming or having some kind of stress-induced hallucination. How? I know this is a lot to take in," Zara continued, setting down her makeup brush. "But since you're here, maybe you could help me with something. I can never reach the spots between my shoulder blades properly, and the coverage always ends up uneven there." She turned slightly to show him her back, where the same glowing patterns continued across her shoulder blades, right where the wing-like structures connected to her body. Jake could see that she'd been trying to cover them with the same cream she was using on her arms, but there were obvious gaps where she couldn't reach. "This is impossible," Jake whispered, finally finding his voice. "People don't just glow, and those things on your back, they're not human." Zara nodded patiently. "You're absolutely right. They're not human because I'm not human. Well, not entirely anyway." The words hung in the air between them. Jake felt like he should run or call someone or at least ask more questions, but instead he found himself staring at the small containers on the counter, trying to understand what he was seeing. "The makeup," he said slowly. "You've been hiding this the whole time we've been roommates." "Every single day," Zara confirmed. "It takes me about 45 minutes each morning to look completely human. That's why I always get up so early and why I sometimes seem tired. Maintaining this appearance is exhausting." Jake leaned against the doorframe, feeling like he needed the support. "So when you said you were from overseas, that wasn't technically a lie," Zara said with a slight smile. "I am from very, very far away, just much further than you probably imagined." The bathroom fell silent except for the soft hum of the ventilation fan. Jake stared at his roommate, trying to reconcile the person he thought he knew with what he was seeing now. The Zara standing in front of him was still recognizably the same person, but everything he thought he knew about her had just been turned upside down. "I should probably leave," Jake said finally. "Give you some privacy to finish whatever this is." "Actually," Zara said, picking up the makeup brush again, "if you're willing to stay, I really could use the help. Like I said, I can never get the coverage right on my back, and tomorrow I have an important meeting. It would mean a lot if you could help me reach those spots." She held out the brush to him, her expression hopeful but not demanding. Jake looked at the brush, then at her face, then at the glowing patterns on her skin that were unlike anything he'd ever seen before. His astronomy textbook lay forgotten on the counter, no longer the most important thing in the room. Jake took the makeup brush with trembling hands. His mind was racing with 1,000 questions, but somehow his body moved on autopilot. He'd helped his sister with her makeup before prom years ago, so the motion wasn't completely foreign to him. But this was definitely not prom makeup. "Just dab it gently," Zara instructed, turning her back to him. "The formula is different from human cosmetics. It needs to bond with my skin to block the natural light emission." Light emission. Jake repeated the words in his head as he carefully applied the cream to the glowing patterns between her shoulder blades. Up close, he could see that her skin wasn't just glowing randomly. The patterns looked purposeful, almost like circuitry or constellations. "There," he said after a few minutes, stepping back. "I think I got all the spots you missed." Zara turned to check in the mirror, moving her shoulders to inspect his work. "Perfect. Thank you, Jake. I know this is overwhelming, but you're handling it better than I expected." "Am I, though?" Jake set the brush down on the counter. "Because I feel like I'm having some kind of breakdown. 6 months, Zara. We've been living together for 6 months, and I had no idea you were not human. I was going to say different, but yeah, not human works too." Zara began putting away her makeup supplies, each movement careful and practiced. "I understand why you're upset. Deception wasn't my intention, but secrecy was necessary. My people have been studying Earth for decades, but we've never had someone live among humans for an extended period. I volunteered for this mission because I wanted to understand your species better." Jake sat down on the edge of the bathtub, his legs suddenly feeling weak. "Your people. So there are more of you?" "Oh yes, many more. We live on Europa, one of Jupiter's moons. You actually studied it in your astronomy class last month. I heard you talking about it with your study group." "Europa?" Jake's voice was barely a whisper. "The ice moon with the underground ocean, that's the one. Though it's not as cold as your scientists think. We've built cities beneath the ice powered by geothermal vents. The water is warm and full of life." Her eyes seemed to glow slightly as she spoke, and Jake realized it wasn't a trick of the light. "I miss the bioluminescent gardens most. Everything there glows naturally, so I never had to hide what I am." Jake tried to imagine underwater cities filled with beings like Zara, but his mind kept stalling on the impossibility of it all. "How did you even get here?" "I mean, Europa is millions of miles away. Our technology is more advanced than what humans have developed so far. The journey took several months, but we've been making trips to Earth for research purposes for about 50 years now. Usually just quick visits to observe and collect data. But the council decided we needed deeper understanding of human culture and relationships. That's where I come in." "And they just dropped you off at a college campus?" Zara laughed, and the sound was exactly the same as the laugh Jake had heard hundreds of times before. It was reassuring in a strange way. "Not quite that simple. I spent 2 years learning about human behavior and society before coming here. I had to learn how to walk differently, because our gravity is much lighter. I had to study your food, your customs, your technology. Even simple things like how to use a coffee maker or understanding why humans watch television. Is that why you never wanted to watch movies with me? I always thought you just didn't like the same things I did. Actually, I love human entertainment, but your movies about space and aliens always made me nervous. I was afraid I'd give something away by reacting wrong to how you portray other species. Jake thought about all the times he'd suggested watching sci-fi movies, and Zara had politely declined. He'd assumed she just wasn't interested in that genre. Now he realized she was probably worried about seeing her own kind misrepresented on screen. The job at the research facility, he said, pieces starting to click together. You're not really working there, are you? I do work there, but not in the way you think. I have a small laboratory set up in the basement where I conduct my real research. Dr. Peterson thinks I'm a graduate student from overseas working on atmospheric studies. He has no idea I'm actually studying human social behaviors and cultural patterns. And your reports go back to Europa? Every few weeks. I transmit my findings during what humans call meteor showers. The cosmic interference helps mask the signal. Zara finished putting away the last of her makeup supplies and turned to face Jake fully. I've learned so much in the past 6 months. Things about friendship, trust, kindness. Concepts that exist in our society but work differently than they do among humans. Jake stood up slowly, his mind still trying to process everything. The morning routine, the early rising, all those times you seemed tired. It was because of this. He gestured at her face, which now looked completely human again. The physical transformation takes a lot of energy, and maintaining it all day is exhausting. By evening, I'm usually drained. That's why I go to bed early most nights. And you've been doing this alone for 6 months. Something in Jake's voice made Zara look at him more carefully. It's what I signed up for. I knew the mission would be isolating. But it doesn't have to be, does it? Jake surprised himself with his next words. I mean, now that I know you don't have to hide from me anymore. At least not at home. Zara's expression shifted, and for the first time since he'd walked into the bathroom, she looked vulnerable. You would be okay with that? Having an alien for a roommate? I've had an alien for a roommate for 6 months already, Jake pointed out. You're still the same person who leaves notes reminding me to buy milk and always keeps the kitchen cleaner than I do. You're still the person who helped me study for my physics exam, even though you probably know more about physics than my professor does. I do know more about physics than your professor does, Zara admitted with a small smile. See, same person, just with some extra abilities and a really impressive commute to work. For the first time since the conversation started, Zara's shoulders relaxed. The tension she'd been carrying seemed to melt away. I was terrified you'd want me to move out, or that you'd report me to someone. Who would I report you to? The government? They'd probably think I was crazy. Jake paused. Are there others here? Other aliens living among humans? A few in different cities around the world. But we don't have contact with each other during our missions. It's safer that way. The bathroom fell quiet again. Jake looked at his roommate, really looked at her, trying to see past the perfect human disguise she wore. Now that he knew what to look for, he could see subtle differences. The way she moved was just slightly too graceful. Her skin was maybe a little too perfect. Her eyes held knowledge that seemed far older than her apparent age. Can I ask you something? Jake said finally, of course. Are you homesick? The question seemed to surprise her. Her carefully controlled expression cracked just a little, and Jake saw something raw and honest underneath. Every single day, she whispered. I miss my family. I miss swimming through the coral forests. I miss food that doesn't require me to pretend I enjoy it. I miss being able to touch things without worrying about leaving glowing fingerprints. Glowing fingerprints? I have to wear special gloves when I'm out in public. My natural body temperature runs higher than humans, and prolonged contact with surfaces can leave traces of bioluminescence. Jake thought about all the times he'd seen her wearing thin gloves while studying or handling books, another detail that finally made sense. The help you asked for, he said. With the makeup. It's not just about reaching difficult spots, is it? It's about not having to do everything alone anymore. Zara nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I hadn't realized how lonely I was until you offered to help. Having someone know the truth, even just one person, makes everything feel less impossible. Jake made a decision that surprised him with its certainty. Then let's figure out a way to make this work. Both of us. The next morning, Jake woke up wondering if the previous night had been some kind of vivid dream. But when he shuffled to the kitchen for coffee, he found a note waiting for him on the counter in Zara's familiar handwriting. Thank you for yesterday. If the offer still stands, I could use help at 7 a.m. Jake checked the clock. It was 6:45 a.m. He'd never been awake this early voluntarily in his entire college career, but somehow he felt wide awake. He knocked softly on the bathroom door. Come in, came Zara's voice from inside. She was standing in front of the mirror again, but this time Jake was prepared for what he'd see. Without her human disguise, Zara looked like something from a beautiful dream. The bioluminescent patterns on her skin were brighter in the morning light, pulsing gently like a slow heartbeat. The wing-like structures on her back moved slightly as she breathed, almost like gills. Good morning, she said, meeting his eyes in the mirror. I wasn't sure you'd actually show up. Neither was I, to be honest, Jake admitted. But here I am. What do you need me to do? Zara handed him a different container than the one from the night before. This is the base layer. It goes on first to neutralize the light emission. Then we'll use the color-matching foundation to make everything look human. Jake opened the container and was surprised by the texture. It felt warm and almost alive under his fingers. What's this made of? Organic compounds from Europa. It's designed to interact with my skin chemistry. Regular human makeup wouldn't work on me. She turned her back to him, exposing the intricate patterns across her shoulders. Start at the top and work your way down. You need to make sure it's completely even, or the light will show through in patches. As Jake began applying the strange makeup, he found himself fascinated by the patterns under his fingers. Up close, they weren't just random designs. They looked like they had purpose, like some kind of biological circuitry. What do these actually do? He asked, carefully covering a particularly bright section near her shoulder blade. They're part of my respiratory system, among other things. They help process different atmospheric compositions and regulate body temperature. They also help with navigation when I'm swimming back home. Swimming navigation? The patterns can sense electromagnetic fields and water currents. Very useful in an underwater environment. Zara moved slightly to give him better access to a difficult spot. Your ocean creatures do something similar. Sharks, for instance, have organs that detect electrical fields. Jake paused in his work. So you're like a human shark? Zara laughed, the sound light and musical. I suppose that's one way to put it, though I prefer to think of myself as more dolphin-like. Much friendlier. As they worked together, Jake found the routine oddly soothing. There was something meditative about the careful, methodical process of helping Zara transform her appearance. It was also strangely intimate, but not in an uncomfortable way. It felt like the kind of trust that developed between close friends or family members. There, he said after about 20 minutes. How's that look? Zara turned to check in the mirror, moving her arms and shoulders to make sure the coverage was complete. Perfect. Much better than I could do alone. Now for the tricky part. She picked up a smaller brush and began working on her face. Jake watched, mesmerized, as she carefully covered the subtle glow around her eyes and the faint luminescent lines that traced along her cheekbones. It was like watching a master artist at work. Can I ask you something personal? Jake said as she worked. Everything about this is personal, Zara replied with a smile. What do you want to know? Do you ever get to be yourself? I mean really yourself without having to hide. Zara's hands stilled for a moment. Not since I arrived on Earth. This is the first time in 6 months that someone has seen me without the disguise. That must be exhausting. Not just physically, but mentally too. It is. Sometimes I forget what I actually look like. I spend so much time staring at my human reflection that my real face starts to feel foreign. Jake thought about that as Zara finished her makeup routine. He couldn't imagine having to pretend to be someone else every single day, never being able to relax or let his guard down. It sounded incredibly lonely. What if you didn't have to hide when you're at home? He suggested. I mean, when it's just us here, you could be yourself. Zara turned to look at him directly. You'd be okay with that? Having your roommate look like this around the apartment? Why wouldn't I be? You're still you, regardless of what you look like. Besides, it might be nice for you to get a break from the constant disguise. Something shifted in Zara's expression. It was subtle, but Jake could see hope creeping into her features. That would be wonderful, actually. But what if someone comes over? What if we have unexpected visitors? We'll figure it out. Maybe we can come up with a system. A knock or a signal so you know when you need to be in disguise mode. Over the next few weeks, they developed their routine. Every morning at 7 a.m., Jake would help Zara apply her human disguise. It became a time when they talked about everything and nothing. Zara would tell him about life on Europa, describing the vast underwater cities and the way light danced through the ice above them. Jake would share stories about growing up on Earth, explaining human customs that Zara found confusing or amusing. "Why do humans keep plants inside their homes if they're just going to die eventually?" she asked one morning as Jake carefully covered the patterns on her neck. "I don't know. I guess we like having something alive and growing around us, even if it's temporary. But on Europa, we integrate living organisms into our architecture. The buildings themselves are alive and growing. They filter our water and produce oxygen. Your houseplants seem so disconnected." "Maybe that's the point," Jake mused. "We like the responsibility of taking care of something, even if we're not very good at it." These conversations became the highlight of Jake's day. Zara's perspective on human behavior was fascinating. She noticed things that Jake had never thought about, patterns in human society that were invisible to him because he'd grown up with them. In the evenings, when they were both home, Zara would let her disguise fade away. The first few times, Jake found it distracting. He'd be trying to study, and out of the corner of his eye, he'd catch sight of her glowing softly as she read on the couch. But gradually, it became normal. More than normal, it became comforting. "Your light changes depending on your mood," Jake observed one evening as they watched a documentary about marine life. "Does it?" Zara looked down at her arms where the patterns were currently a soft blue-green. "I hadn't noticed. What does this color mean?" "You always glow this color when you're relaxed and happy. When you're concentrating on your research, you turn more silver. And when you were homesick last week, you were definitely more purple." Zara stared at him in amazement. "You've been paying attention to that?" "Hard not to when your roommate is basically a living mood ring." She laughed and her glow brightened noticeably. "I had no idea I was so transparent. No wonder my people chose me for diplomatic missions. I apparently can't hide anything. Is that what this is? A diplomatic mission?" "In a way. I'm supposed to assess whether humans are ready for formal contact with other species. My reports will help the council decide whether to reveal our existence or wait another few decades." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "And what are you going to tell them?" Zara was quiet for a long moment, her light dimming to a thoughtful amber. "I'm going to tell them that humans are more adaptable and accepting than we expected. At least some humans are." She looked at him meaningfully, and Jake realized that his reaction to discovering her secret had become part of her official report. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. "No pressure or anything," he joked. But his voice came out a little strained. "Actually," Zara said gently, "you've already exceeded every expectation I had. The fact that you're helping me every morning, that you've made our home a place where I can be myself, that you ask questions because you're genuinely curious rather than afraid. It's given me hope for what contact between our species could look like." Jake felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with Zara's bioluminescence. "So I'm like your test case for humanity?" "You're my friend," Zara said simply, "and that's something I never expected to find on this mission." As Jake helped her remove the last traces of her makeup that night, he realized that their morning routine had become about much more than practical necessity. It had become a daily affirmation of trust, a ritual that said, "I accept you exactly as you are." And somehow, in helping Zara feel more at home on Earth, Jake had started to feel more at home with himself too. 3 weeks into their new routine, Jake was starting to feel like he'd adapted pretty well to having an alien roommate. He'd gotten used to Zara's soft glow filling their apartment in the evenings, and their morning makeup sessions had become as natural as brushing his teeth. He thought they had everything figured out until Zara came home looking panicked one Tuesday afternoon. "We have a problem," she said, not even bothering to let her disguise fade like she usually did. "Dr. Kellner is coming for an inspection tomorrow." Jake looked up from his textbook. "Who's Dr. Kellner?" "My supervisor. The one who's monitoring my mission from Europa." Zara began pacing around their small living room, her movements sharp and anxious. "She wasn't supposed to visit for another month, but something has changed. She wants to evaluate my progress and see how well I've integrated into human society." "Okay, so she comes. You show her around. Tell her how great everything is going. What's the problem?" Zara stopped pacing and looked at him with worry written all over her face. "The problem is that she's not just going to observe from a distance. She's going to interview you." "Me?" Jake's voice cracked slightly. Why would she want to talk to me? Because you're my primary human contact, my closest relationship on Earth. She needs to assess whether I've successfully maintained my cover while still forming meaningful connections with your species. Zara sat down heavily on the couch. Jake, if she discovers that you know what I really am, my mission could be considered compromised. They might pull me back to Europa immediately. The weight of her words hit Jake like a brick. He'd gotten so comfortable with their new normal that he'd forgotten Zara's situation was temporary and precarious. So what do? You have to pretend you don't know anything. Act like you've been living with a normal human exchange student this whole time. Don't mention anything about our morning routine. Don't ask questions about space or other planets. And definitely don't let on that you've seen me without my disguise. Jake nodded, but inside his stomach was churning. What if I mess up? What if I accidentally say something that gives it away? Then I'll probably be on a ship back to Europa within a week. That night, neither of them slept much. Jake lay in bed rehearsing conversations in his head, trying to think of how a normal roommate would talk about Zara. The problem was, he wasn't sure he remembered what their relationship had been like before he knew the truth. Had they talked differently? Had he paid less attention to her habits? The next morning, their makeup routine felt tense and rushed. Zara's hands shook slightly as she applied her foundation, and Jake had to redo one section of her back twice because he couldn't get it even. What time is she coming? Jake asked as they finished up. 2 o'clock. She wants to observe a typical afternoon in my life, then interview you around 4. And she looks human too? Completely. She's been doing this much longer than I have. You won't be able to tell the difference. Jake went to his classes that day, but he couldn't concentrate on anything his professors were saying. His mind kept jumping between different scenarios of how the afternoon could go wrong. What if Dr. Kellner asked him about Zara's eating habits? He'd noticed she never finished her meals and always seemed to be forcing herself to eat human food. What if she asked about Zara's sleep schedule, or her weird work hours? When Jake got home at 1:30, Zara was cleaning the apartment with an intensity he'd never seen before. Every surface was spotless, and she'd hidden away anything that might seem unusual. Her special makeup was locked away in a box under her bed, and she'd even rearranged the furniture to look more traditionally human. You don't have to be perfect, Jake told her as she wiped down the coffee table for the 3rd time. Yes, I do. Dr. Kellner has very high standards. If she thinks I've become too comfortable or let my guard down, it could affect not just my mission but future contact between our species. At exactly 2 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Jake answered it and found himself looking at a woman who appeared to be in her 40s with short gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She was wearing a simple dark suit and carrying a briefcase. You must be Jake, she said with a slight accent that Jake couldn't place. I'm Dr. Kellner. I work with Zara at the research facility. Nice to meet you, Jake replied, hoping his voice sounded normal. Zara's just finishing up some work in her room. She should be out in a minute. Dr. Kellner stepped into the apartment and began looking around with the systematic attention of someone conducting an inspection. Her eyes took in every detail, from the books on Jake's desk to the dishes in the sink. Jake felt like he was being evaluated too, even though she hadn't officially started interviewing him yet. Zara emerged from her bedroom, looking perfectly human and professionally composed. Dr. Kellner, welcome to my home. I hope your flight went well. Quite well, thank you. Shall we begin with a tour of your living space? For the next hour, Jake watched Dr. Kellner examine their apartment with scientific precision. She asked Zara questions about her daily routine, her relationship with neighbors, and her adaptation to local customs. Zara answered everything smoothly, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. The close call came when Dr. Kellner opened their bathroom medicine cabinet without warning. Interesting, she said, holding up a bottle of vitamins. These aren't typically necessary for our physiology. Jake's heart stopped. He knew those weren't actually vitamins. They were supplements Zara needed to help her process human food. Oh, those, Zara said casually, though Jake caught a flicker of panic in her eyes. Jake recommended them when I mentioned feeling tired from adjusting to the local diet. I thought it would be good to blend in with human health habits. Dr. Kellner made a note in her notebook, and Jake couldn't tell if she was satisfied with the answer or suspicious. At 4 o'clock, Dr. Kellner turned her attention to Jake. Now, I'd like to speak with you about your experience living with Zara. They sat in the living room while Zara retreated to her bedroom, supposedly to give them privacy, but probably to avoid watching Jake potentially ruin everything. "How long have you been roommates?" Dr. Kellner began. "About 6 months now, since the beginning of the semester." "And how would you describe Zara as a person?" Jake took a breath and tried to think like someone who didn't know Zara's secret. "She's pretty quiet, keeps to herself mostly. Very clean, always does her share of the housework. She works a lot, comes home late most nights." "Have you noticed anything unusual about her behavior or habits?" This was dangerous territory. Jake thought about all the things he'd learned about Zara over the past few weeks. Her difficulty with human food, her need for specific lighting, the way she sometimes seemed homesick for a place she'd never talked about. "Not really unusual," he said carefully. "She's from overseas, so sometimes she does things a little differently than I would. Different food preferences, different sleep schedule, but nothing weird or anything." "What about her social life? Does she have friends? Date anyone?" "She's pretty focused on her studies and work. I don't think she's had time for much of a social life. Sometimes I've invited her to hang out with my friends, but she usually says she's too busy." Dr. Kellner continued asking questions for another 20 minutes. Jake tried to answer honestly while being vague enough not to reveal anything important. The hardest part was pretending he didn't care about Zara as much as he actually did. In his answers, he made her sound like just some quiet foreign student he happened to share an apartment with, not the close friend she'd become. When Dr. Kellner finally left, Jake felt drained. Zara emerged from her bedroom looking pale and exhausted. "How do you think it went?" she asked. "I have no idea. She's impossible to read." They sat together on the couch, both too nervous to talk much. Jake wanted to tell Zara that everything would be okay, but he wasn't sure that was true. The interview had made him realize how precarious her situation really was, and how much he'd grown to care about her staying. "Jake," Zara said quietly, "I want you to know that these past few weeks, having someone who knows the real me, it's meant everything. Whatever happens with Dr. Kellner's evaluation, I'm grateful for our friendship." "Don't talk like you're already leaving," Jake said. "Maybe we fooled her. Maybe everything will be fine." But even as he said it, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that their comfortable routine was about to be disrupted in ways they couldn't control. The next morning, their makeup routine felt different. They were both trying to act normal, but there was an underlying current of worry that neither of them could ignore. As Jake helped cover the glowing patterns on Zara's back, he found himself memorizing every detail, just in case it was one of the last times he'd get to see her real self. "Whatever Dr. Kellner decides," Jake said as he finished applying the concealer, "I want you to know that you've changed how I think about everything, about what it means to be different, about friendship, about the universe. You've made my life bigger, if that makes sense." Zara met his eyes in the mirror, and for a moment her carefully controlled expression cracked. "It makes perfect sense," she said softly. "You've done the same for me." Neither of them knew that in just a few hours they'd face a crisis that would test everything they'd built together. The crisis came at the worst possible moment. Jake was in his advanced physics class when his phone buzzed with a text from Zara. "Emergency. Come home now, please." He'd never seen Zara use the word please in a text before. Without asking permission, Jake grabbed his backpack and left class, ignoring Professor Williams calling after him. The 15-minute walk home felt like an hour. Jake's mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Had Dr. Kellner discovered something? Had Zara been exposed somehow? Was she already being taken back to Europa? When he burst through their apartment door, he found Zara sitting on the couch next to Professor Williams. Jake's astronomy professor was staring at her with a mixture of fascination and disbelief, while Zara looked like she wanted to disappear into the cushions. "Jake," Professor Williams said without taking his eyes off Zara, "your roommate has something quite extraordinary to show us." Jake's heart sank. "Professor Williams, I can explain." "Actually," came a voice from the kitchen. "No explanation is necessary." Dr. Kellner walked into the living room carrying a cup of tea, looking completely calm. But now that Jake knew what to look for, he could see subtle differences in her appearance too. Her movements were too fluid. Her skin had an almost imperceptible glow in the afternoon light. "You're like Zara," Jake said, the pieces suddenly clicking together. "Very good." Dr. Kellner smiled. "Yes, I am. And I must say your performance yesterday was quite impressive. You managed to lie convincingly while still showing genuine care for your roommate. That's a difficult balance to achieve. Jake looked back and forth between the three of them, his brain struggling to catch up. You knew? You knew that I knew? I suspected, Dr. Kellner said, settling into Jake's favorite chair. Zara's recent reports showed significant changes in her emotional well-being and social integration. When someone who has been isolated and homesick for months suddenly becomes happier and more confident, there's usually a reason. I needed to determine what that reason was. Zara, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke up. Dr. Kellner, please don't blame Jake for any of this. He's been nothing but helpful. If my mission is compromised, it's my fault, not his. Compromised? Dr. Kellner raised an eyebrow. My dear, your mission has been the most successful integration study we've ever conducted. Your reports on human friendship, trust, and adaptability have exceeded all our expectations. But I broke protocol. I revealed my identity to a human. Yes, you did. And in doing so, you discovered something we never could have learned through observation alone. Dr. Kellner turned to Jake. How did you react when you first saw Zara's true form? Jake thought back to that night in the bathroom, which felt like a lifetime ago now. I was shocked, obviously, but mostly I was curious, and when she asked for help, I wanted to help her. Exactly. No fear, no aggression, no attempt to exploit the situation for personal gain. Just genuine human compassion. Dr. Kellner made a note in her ever-present notebook. This tells us something very important about human nature. Professor Williams, who had been listening to this conversation with growing amazement, finally found his voice. Are you telling me that there are alien species living among us right now? A small number, yes, Dr. Kellner confirmed. We've been conducting these integration studies for decades, preparing for the possibility of formal contact. And you chose Jake's apartment for this study? Actually, we didn't choose Jake specifically. Zara was placed with a human roommate as part of her mission parameters. The fact that she ended up with someone so accepting was largely coincidental. Jake felt a strange pride at being called accepting, but also a growing worry. So what happens now? Do you take Zara back to Europa? Do you make me sign some kind of secrecy agreement? Dr. Kellner and Zara exchanged a look that Jake couldn't interpret. That, Dr. Kellner said, depends largely on what you want to happen, Jake, and what Zara wants. What I want? Zara sounded surprised. I thought my mission parameters were already decided. They were, but your success has opened up new possibilities. Dr. Kellner leaned forward in her chair. The council has authorized an extension of your study if you're willing. Instead of returning to Europa next month, you could stay for another full year, but this time with an official human liaison. A liaison? Jake asked. Someone who knows the truth and can help facilitate deeper cultural exchange. Someone who has already proven they can handle the responsibility. Dr. Kellner looked at Jake meaningfully. The position would come with certain benefits. Access to our technology, advanced scientific knowledge, and the opportunity to be part of the most significant moment in human history. Jake felt like the room was spinning. You're offering me a job? Working with aliens? We're offering you the chance to help bridge two worlds, Dr. Kellner corrected. But I should warn you, it's not without risks. There are still those on both sides who aren't ready for contact. If this arrangement were discovered by the wrong people, it could be dangerous for all of us. Jake looked at Zara, trying to read her expression. What do you think? Do you want to stay? I want to, Zara said softly, but only if you want me to. This would change your life completely, Jake. You'd have to keep secrets, help maintain my cover, and deal with complexities you can't even imagine yet. As opposed to what? Going back to my normal, boring life where the most exciting thing that happens is a pop quiz in astronomy class? Professor Williams, who had been remarkably quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. Jake, do you have any idea what kind of opportunity this is? The scientific implications alone. Professor Williams, Dr. Kellner interrupted gently. I'm afraid I'll need your word that this conversation stays between us. Of course. But surely you understand the significance of this moment? First contact between species documented and studied properly. Actually, Dr. Kellner said with a small smile, if Jake agrees to this arrangement, we might have another position to fill. We could use a human scientist to help us understand how your species processes and shares knowledge. Professor Williams looked like he might faint from excitement. Over the next hour, Dr. Kellner explained what the extended mission would involve. Zara would continue her cultural studies, but with Jake's help she could dig deeper into human relationships, social structures, and emotional connections. Jake would essentially become a cultural interpreter, helping Zara understand the nuances of human behavior, while also serving as a test case for how humans might react to eventual widespread contact. "There's one more thing," Dr. Kellner said as she prepared to leave. "This arrangement would be unprecedented. You two would be creating a new model for human-Europa cooperation. The pressure would be significant and there would be no going back to your old relationship." Jake looked at Zara, who was nervously glowing a soft amber color. Over the past few weeks, she'd become his closest friend. The thought of her leaving had been unbearable, but the thought of their relationship becoming some kind of official diplomatic arrangement was also intimidating. "Can I ask you something honestly?" Jake said to Zara. "If you could go home tomorrow back to your family and your underwater cities and your bioluminescent gardens, would you?" Zara considered the question seriously. A month ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. But now, she looked around their small apartment, taking in the mismatched furniture, Jake's scattered textbooks, and the coffee mug she'd been drinking from. "This feels like home too. Not because of the place, but because of the person I get to share it with. So we're doing this?" "We're doing this." Dr. Kellner smiled and closed her notebook. "Excellent. I'll inform the council of your decision. Jake, you'll need to sign some official documents and we'll need to set up secure communication channels. Zara, your new mission parameters will arrive within a few days." After Dr. Kellner and Professor Williams left, Jake and Zara sat together on their couch in comfortable silence. The afternoon sun was streaming through their windows, and Zara had let her disguise fade completely. Her natural glow mixed with the sunlight, creating patterns of light and shadow on the walls. "So," Jake said eventually, "I guess our morning routine is going to continue for a while." "Actually," Zara said with a mischievous smile, "part of my new mission involves studying what happens when humans gradually get used to non-human appearances. Dr. Kellner suggested I might not need to maintain my disguise as strictly as before." "Meaning?" "Meaning maybe sometimes we can go grocery shopping with me looking like this. Or study together in the library. Small steps toward normalization," Jake grinned. "I can't wait to see people's reactions when my roommate starts literally glowing during finals week." "Just promise me something," Zara said, her tone becoming more serious. "Anything. Promise me that no matter how big this gets, no matter what kind of official responsibilities we end up with, we won't forget that it all started with you just trying to help a friend." Jake reached over and took her hand, which was warm and slightly luminescent. "I promise. Though I have to say, when I decided to help you with your makeup that first night, I never imagined it would lead to becoming Earth's first alien liaison. And when I asked for help reaching those spots on my back," Zara said, "I never imagined I'd find a best friend." They sat together as the sun set,